Welcome back to Spill The TXC with me, your host, Amber. I hope you guys have had such a good week. I've had an interesting one, and I'm going to tell you a bit about it. So I'm going to give you 2 good things and 1 bad thing that happened to me. And I'm going to start with the bad thing, not because I'm a glass half empty kind of girl, but because I like to get the negativity out of the way first. So a little bit of backstory. I have a TikTok. And over on TikTok, I'm doing quite well. I've got 500,000 followers. I tell people stories. So people write their stories into me. I rewrite them and tell them in a first person account. Or I go onto Reddit and get some stories. Or sometimes I make a story up and it's satire and it's purely for entertainment. I think about 3 of the stories on my TikTok are my own. Out of all of them, there are hundreds. About 3 are my own. So I think it's pretty obvious that I tell other people's stories. I make it clear in the hashtags, although I don't think everybody reads hashtags. I also make it clear in my bio. If you are to go onto my page, you would see that I'm reading other people's stories. Anyway, that's the backstory. The other day, I was walking down the street, minding my own business, and I was screamed at. I was screamed at for being a bad mum. Now, I can tell you exactly what story this is in reference to. I had a man write into me about how he doesn't think he should be paying his child support, blah, blah, blah. I went back to the man and I said, look, there's a lot of stories like this. Would you mind if I did it from a woman's point of view, kind of used your story, but from a woman's point of view? And he was like, yeah, fine. Like, I'm not really looking for answers or advice. I just thought it'd be entertaining. So I was like, okay, great. If I'm honest with you, I knew that doing it from a woman's point of view, talking about how I don't want to be paying child support, I knew that would get more views, and that's why I did it. So that's what it was. I thought I made it clear in the hashtags, maybe not as clear as what I should have made it. But this woman, she came up to me in the street and she screamed at me that I'm a bad mum, that I don't deserve to have children, that there are people out there who are, longing for children who can't have them. I was one of those people. I had IVF to have my little girl, and that story isn't about me. And I did explain to her how it wasn't about me. I did explain to her that I read other people's stories, and I was very, very calm in explaining this. But I think she'd kind of gone a bit too far with what she was doing, so that, when you're in an argument with your partner and you're in the wrong, but you've gone too far, so you just need to stand on business and just see it through. I've been in that situation before with my partner. It actually took me a year to apologise because I could never admit that I was in the wrong. But with a stranger, it's different. You don't care about this stranger. You don't, it's not a pride thing to admit that you're wrong. You're probably never going to see them again anyway. But yeah, maybe it was that. She'd just gone too far and she couldn't go back. And she was calling me all of the names under the sun and really doubling down on this point that I was a bad mum. I'm a bloody great mum. But anyway, that was my negative. It was highly embarrassing, highly humiliating, and there were people who were stopping and staring. Nobody stepped in because I'm sure they probably thought I was a bad mum from what she was shouting, and they probably thought that I deserved whatever she was saying. So yeah, that was extremely embarrassing, and I hope to never experience that again. Just read the hashtags. And my 2 bits of good news, I've been asked to sing at 2 friends' weddings this week, and I think it's so exciting and amazing in itself, but I think you find a lot of the time people don't outwardly support friends. So it's really nice to feel what I'm feeling, and they want me to sing at their wedding, and it's just really, really lovely, and I'm so honoured and so happy about it, and that's my good news. Let me know what your week has been like in the comments. Give me 1 bad and 2 good, because it's important to talk about the bad and get it off of our chest, but it's more important to focus on the good, so we'll have 2 of them. And now we can move on to today's episode, which is all about night shift stories. And to be honest with you, this whole episode is just one giant After Dark segment, because they're all scary, so there's not going to be an After Dark section. It's just going to be all After Dark. All scary, just how we like it. I saw the job listing 2 weeks ago. Wanted. Night guard at Wess Market, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift, $21 an hour. The whole thing struck me as odd, right off the bat. What kind of grocery store needed a security guard whilst it was closed? Was the crime really that bad? But I needed the money. Badly. And 2 days later, after a phone interview with a man named Clive, I showed up for my first shift. As soon as I pulled up, I sort of understood why they needed a night guard. The grocery store sat at the edge of a run-down strip mall. Large signs reading space for rent hung in the store windows, but judging by the dusty glass and flickering street lamps, nobody had taken them up on their offer in years. I parked near the front door, and as I approached the building, I saw a woman hurrying away from the store. "You must be Aaron," she said breathlessly. "The night guard?" "That's me. Clive left you some instructions. I've put them on the conveyor belt at register 1. She gave me a polite nod and then stepped around me, heading for the only other car in the parking lot. "Oh, thanks." "Be friendly," my inner voice scolded. "She's your new co-worker." I turned around. "Hey, what's your name?" But she was already diving into the car. The door slammed, the car reeled out of the parking space, and then she was gone. So much for a new friend. I turned back towards the store. The parking lot was completely empty now, and the nearest streetlight was flickering with an odd, erratic rhythm. A cold wind swept in, whipping a crumpled paper bag across the parking lot. Well, here goes nothing. I stepped up to the store. The glass doors squeaked as they parted for me, and then I stepped inside. Despite its outward appearance, the store was actually pretty nice inside. Bright fluorescent lights shone from overhead. Jazzy music played from hidden speakers. I headed over to register 1, where a folded piece of paper was waiting for me. I flipped it open and began to read. "Dear Aaron, welcome to the Wess family. We sincerely hope you enjoy your first shift. To help you, we've compiled a list of rules that should make your shift as easy as our fresh-baked apple pie. Number 1. As night guard, you are expected to patrol the store every half hour, making sure nothing is amiss. You may spend the rest of your time in the break room at the back of the store monitoring the security camera feeds. Number 2. Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. Number 3. If you hear a knocking sound coming from within the freezers in the frozen food aisle, ignore it. Number 4. If you see a shopping cart that hasn't been put away, please return it to the shopping carts at the front of the store immediately. Number 5. Do not be alarmed if you find a pool of blood in the meat aisle. Sometimes our meat packages leak. Simply head to the storage closet, get the mop and bucket and clean it up. However, do not step in the puddle or touch it in any way. Number 6. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room and stay there until she leaves. Do not call the police or report a break-in. Do not make eye contact with her. Number 7. The music we play throughout the store is a pre-recorded disc of instrumental jazz. If the music ever stops, immediately go to the break room and stay there until it resumes. Number 8. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Thank you so much, and again, I hope you enjoy your shift. Clive. I stared at the rules, rereading them slowly. They were so weird. A woman in the store. Avoid aisle 7. I'd never been given instructions like this, even when I worked as a bouncer at a nightclub in a bad part of town. Maybe it was a test. They wanted to see how well I could follow instructions, no matter how absurd they were. I looked up at the security camera staring down at me from the corner. Okay, I thought. Challenge accepted. I glanced at my phone. 12:06. Might as well get my first patrol out of the way now before getting settled in. It was odd walking through the store when it was so empty and quiet. All the breads and muffins had been stored away somewhere. White, opaque plastic had been pulled down over the vegetable display to keep the cold in. And when I got to the end, I made a right into the meat section. Sheets of plastic had been pulled over the meat coolers too. I saw flashes of red through the gaps of massive ribeye and sirloin steaks, big slabs of meat with the bones still intact. I averted my eyes. Whilst I wasn't a vegetarian, I never really liked the sight of raw meat. I turned instead to the aisles. Aisle 3, pasta and sauces, all lined up on the shelves, glinting in the fluorescent light. Aisle 4, cookies and snacks. Aisle 5, aisle 6. Oh right, I wasn't supposed to look at aisle 7. I forced myself to look down at the floor. Yeah, it was stupid, but they told me not to look. And in the off chance they were going to check the CCTV footage later to grade my performance, I was going to follow every single rule. I continued further into the store. A few minutes later, I found the break room, a nondescript brown door with a little square window cut into it. I took note of its location for later, and as soon as I was done with this patrol, I was going to break out my laptop and finish watching Friday the 13th. And then I was at the west end of the store, the frozen section. I turned down the aisle, heading back towards the front, and that's when I saw it. A shopping cart, parked askew in the middle of the aisle. I huffed. Of all the rules, this was the one that annoyed me the most. I was hired to be security, not a clean-up crew. Wasn't it the employee's job to set the carts away at closing time? Sighing, I began pushing it towards the front of the store. The wheels rolled smoothly underneath me. The jazz music played softly in my ears. I turned the corner and walked past the cash registers, heading towards the front door. And that's when I heard it. A soft sound, barely audible over the jazz music. I stopped, straining my ears to listen. Several seconds of silence went by, and then I heard it again. It sounded like someone crying. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. There's no one in here. The door's been locked the whole time unless a customer had accidentally stayed past closing time. Maybe that employee, the woman I'd run into in the parking lot, maybe she didn't notice them and locked up before they could get out. "Who's there?" I called out. A wailing sob in response. My heart plummeted. It sounded like a woman or possibly even a child. "I'm coming," I called, breaking into a run. "Where are you?" They didn't reply. They just kept sobbing. I frantically continued in the direction of the sound, calling out to them, telling them everything would be okay. But then I stopped. The sound was coming from aisle 7. Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. The rules have been very clear about that. I stopped just short of the aisle, next to an end cap display of mayonnaise, and carefully positioned myself so I was hidden. "I'm going to help you," I called out. "Can you tell me what happened?" They finally spoke, but they didn't answer my question. "Help me," the voice cried, through more sobs. "Please." I wanted to step into the aisle. My foot was already halfway off the floor, ready to run in there and comfort them, but something stopped me. A gut instinct, a little alarm bell going off in my head, because out of all the aisles, what were the chances this person would be in aisle 7? And besides, they were safe. They were in an empty store with me. It's not like they were in a dark alleyway in the middle of the night. "Come out of the aisle," I called, my voice shaking a little. "Then I'll be able to help you." "Please," the voice replied. "Help me. This is stupid. Clearly some person got stuck in here after closing time and they're scared. Just go into the aisle and help them get home." But there was another part of my brain, the instinctual lizard brain part, and it was screaming at me not to move a muscle. "Do you need me to call someone?" I tried. "Your parents or family or the police?" "Help me," the voice pleaded again. The "help me," it sounded the same each time they said it. A little stutter at the beginning, an emphasis on me. It almost sounded like a recording or some AI-generated thing, looping over and over. It didn't sound natural. "Come out of the aisle," I shouted. "Come out and I'll help you." The sobs got louder, faster, hysterical. "Help me," the voice pleaded again in a desperate tone that made my stomach twist. I stood there, pressed against the mayonnaise display, listening to them sob and making my stomach flip-flop, even if it did sound slightly unnatural. I could call the police, I thought. They'd know exactly what to do. Except I'd left my cell phone with my backpack at cash register 1, and getting it would mean crossing aisle 7. The rules didn't say anything about walking past aisle 7, they just said I shouldn't go down or look down it. And I couldn't just stand here and do nothing. What if it really was someone who needed help? A child who'd sprained their ankle and couldn't get up? "Don't worry, I'm getting my phone and calling the police," I called out. Then I took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold of aisle 7 towards register 1. As soon as I took that step, the crying stopped, just like that. Violent sobbing, and then, in an instant, nothing, like a switch had flipped. Then the footsteps started. Loud, slapping footsteps of someone running down the aisle, way too large to be a child, coming straight at me. My heart dropped. It's a trap. They're coming for me, and I'm probably going to die here. But as soon as I made it across the aisle, the sound stopped. All I heard were the soft jazz tunes playing through the speakers overhead. I hightailed it to the break room, completely forgetting about the cart I was supposed to return. The break room was small and cramped. The little square window in the door had been blacked out with construction paper from the inside. The only source of light came from the computer screen on the desk, displaying the security camera feeds. I scrolled through the feeds. I quickly noticed that none of them offered coverage of aisle 7. It seemed like the cameras were intentionally placed to avoid that aisle, and after searching the grainy black and white video for anything amiss, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. When I finally opened them again, it was almost 12:30. Time for my next patrol. I didn't want to go. I felt safe here, locked up in this little room, but I also knew I wouldn't be safe if I didn't listen to the rules. I shuddered, imagining what would have happened to me if I'd gone down aisle 7, if I hadn't listened. I pulled myself out of the seat and headed for the door. The store was completely silent, no hysterical sobbing or pounding footsteps. I started my patrol near the back, walking up aisle 17. Cans of food glinted on the shelves as I passed, but when I glanced at them, I didn't see any labels I recognized. No chef ravioli or giant green men, just generically labeled cans of meat stew. In fact, all the aisles had was meat stew. The same cans over and over and over. I reached the end and turned right towards the front of the store, and that's when I realized that I had already broken one of the rules. The cart? I hadn't returned it. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead of haphazardly parked near aisle 7, it sat next to one of the cash registers, like some ghost man was checking out his groceries. I paused for a second, hands hovering above the handle, and then I grabbed it and headed towards the door. Outside the parking lot was pitch black, not a single street lamp. The shopping carts are only a few feet from the door, I told myself. Just go out and in. It will take 2 seconds. I did it as quickly as possible. I ran into the darkness, slammed the shopping cart into the row, and dashed back inside. And then I shut the doors and clicked the lock. Okay, that wasn't too bad, I said to myself, letting out a sigh of relief. For a second, I reveled in the peace of the store, the silence, the safety of being locked inside with no one else but me. But then I stopped. The silence. The jazz music wasn't playing. How long had it been off? I'd been so preoccupied with returning the cart, I wasn't even paying attention. I broke into a sprint towards the back of the store, cookies and snacks flashing by me, and then I swerved right and sprinted into the break room. I pulled out the list of rules and read them over again. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Why did he write that? Was it just because he didn't want anyone flaking out on him? Or if I left early, would some horrible fate befall me? Because I really, really wanted to leave. I opened my backpack, pulled out the soda I'd bought and popped it open, took a sip, scrolled through the security feed. 5 more hours. The next 4 patrols went fairly well. The rules didn't say how long they had to be, so every 30 minutes I sprinted a lap around the store as fast as I could. The whole thing only took about a minute, and then, for the other 29 minutes, I locked myself in the break room. On the second patrol, I heard knocking as I ran down the freezer aisle. It started as a light tapping across the glass, and then crescended into loud thumps like someone was slamming their palms against the glass doors. As per the rules, I ignored it. I just kept running until I made it back to the break room. and on the last patrol, the music had cut out again, so I quickly detoured and got to the break room as quickly as I could, the silence ringing in my ears. And now, here I was in the break room with 3 hours left. I stared at my phone's clock, ticking slowly towards 3 a.m. I stood up, shaking out my nervous energy, preparing myself to sprint. I'd been a runner back in high school, but in the past 10 years I'd gotten way out of shape. The last patrol had left me panting and breathless, legs aching. My hand closed around the doorknob, my heart hammered in my chest. 3, 2, 1, go. I wrenched the door open and shot out into the store, but I didn't get very far because there was an enormous pool of blood on the floor. I froze, all the air sucked out of my lungs. I stared at the blood, shining in the fluorescent lights. The rules said to clean it up, but that would take at least 10 minutes. I wasn't safe out here. I swallowed. Then I hurried to the supply closet, got a mop and a bucket, and started cleaning as fast as I could. The job was messy. I slid the mop through the blood, then dunked it in the bucket, rinsed and repeated. The soapy water tinged red. A few times it splashed up and almost landed on me. But I did it. I cleaned it all up without touching a drop. Unfortunately, by the time I was finished, it was 3:27 a.m., time for my next patrol. I was too tired to run, so I settled for a brisk walk around the store. I headed up through the frozen food, and I noticed now that there were handprints on the glass doors. Handprints of all sizes, tilted and smudged, except the proportions looked all wrong, with fingers that were too long, too thin. I averted my eyes and kept going. 2.5 more hours. My footsteps clicked against the tile floor. The jazz was starting to grate on my nerves. I must have heard the same looping saxophone melody 20 times now. It made me want to punch something. Sighing, I continued towards the produce section, briskly walking past the aisles. But then I stopped. Something caught my eye in one of the aisles. I backed up to get a better look. Someone was standing in aisle 9. A woman. She wore a blue linen dress and black high heels. Long black hair cascaded down her back almost to her waist. She faced away from me, standing still, her thin white arms hanging limply at her sides. In her hand was a basket filled with cuts of raw meat. The rule echoed in my head. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room. Do not make eye contact with her. Click, click, click. I heard her footsteps echo against the tile. I hurried my pace towards the break room, but then I stopped. Her footsteps weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from in front of me. I averted my eyes to the floor, just as I saw 2 black high-heeled shoes step into the aisle. I stared at the floor. Do not make eye contact with her. Do not make eye contact with her. The words repeated over and over in my head, but I had to get to the break room and she was standing in the way. All I could see were her shiny, high-heeled shoes and the little drops of blood that leaked out of the meat packages in her basket, staining the floor. I backed up. That was the only way I could go. I kept my eyes on the floor, careful not to look up, but she was following me. Click, click. For every step I took, I saw a shiny black heel come into view, attached to a thin white calf extend, keeping time with me. I quickened my pace, and so did she. Click, click, click. I wheeled around and broke into a sprint. Click, click, click. I ran down an aisle at random and sprinted towards the break room, but then, halfway down the aisle, I stopped. A shopping cart was parked across the middle of the aisle, blocking my way. Not just one. Several of them, stacked up in a teetering tower that was nearly as tall as the aisles themselves. I was trapped. I backed away, my heart pounding. Click, click. Slow, methodical footsteps coming towards me, like a cat stalking its prey. I took my chances. I turned around, sprinted back out into the open, and stepped into the next aisle. Oh no. I knew it instantly. A tattered lump of grey clothing and sickly pale blue skin sat on the floor. The person, the creature, the thing, folded in on itself, in a pose reminiscent of a crying child, but it obviously wasn't anything that resembled a human, with its strange lumps and appendages and complete lack of head. I had stepped into aisle 7. I immediately reversed direction, but not before the thing unfolded itself and began to move towards me. I whipped around and, screaming, sprinted down the next aisle. Miraculously, I made it to the end in one piece, and I veered sharply left towards the break room. Almost there, my hand hit the doorknob. I wrenched it open and dove inside, then I collapsed in the chair, panting. I sucked in a breath, staring at the locked door. Am I really safe in here? Technically, the rules never said I would be safe. Maybe staying in here only decreases my chance of death. I turned my attention to the security camera feed on the monitor. It showed the middle of the store, and from what I could see, the aisles were empty. No trace of the woman. I switched to the next feed, the produce section, empty. I switched to the next one. I jumped. She was standing right there in front of the break room door. She stood so still, the image could have been a photograph, except for the blood slowly dripping from the meat in her basket. I swallowed and glanced away from the monitor at the door. My heart slammed into my ribs when I saw her shadow under the door. Go away. Please go away, I pleaded in my mind. The shadow of her head in the window tilted as if contemplating her next move. Now I knew why the window had been covered. I forced my eyes away and looked back at the screen. She was still standing there, except there was something different about the way she was standing. I squinted at the grainy black and white image, trying to figure out what was going on, and then my eyes finally fell on her heels. And I realized they were facing forward, but I was still looking at the back of her head, at the long black hair cascading to her waist. Either her hair was hanging over her face or she had turned her head all the way around. It must have been 20 minutes before she began to walk away from the door. I couldn't tell if it was just the low frame rate or these crummy cameras, but her movements looked jerky, her body lurching with each step. It made me sick to watch. When she disappeared from the screen, I let out a breath of relief. My hands and legs were shaking and weak. Okay, think. The rules said to wait until she had left. All I had to do was watch the feed by the front door. As soon as I saw her leave the store, I'd be safe. And after a few minutes of sitting there waiting for my heart rate to return to normal, I forced my fingers back to the keyboard. I pressed the arrow key to move to the next feed, then the next, and the next, looking for the camera at the front of the store. No. Her face filled the entire screen. Her eyes filled me with horror. They were pure white, no pupils, no irises, just pure white eyes threaded with spidery veins. I screamed and jumped back. Then I shut my eyes. The rule said don't make eye contact. Did that count through the screen? I let out a terrified, shuddering wow and covered my face with my hands, my entire body shaking. When I finally took a peek through my fingers, I saw her, rapidly scaling down the wall away from the camera on the ceiling, like some kind of spider. Then she pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the night. She had left. I was safe, or as safe as I could be in this cursed grocery store. I glanced at the clock. 3:58 a.m. Time to patrol. I really didn't want to, but I forced myself to swing the door open and run as fast as I could through the store. I saw shopping carts stacked in teetering towers, heard hands pounding against the freezer door, saw little spots of blood on the shiny tile from the woman as she'd stalked me. And then, a minute later, I was done. I locked myself in the break room, and for the first time in years, I began to sob. The remaining patrols went by without incident, though I did hear more sobbing from aisle 7 and more banging from the freezers. And then, the hour had come, 6 a.m. My heart soared at the sight of the pink dawn sky through the glass windows. I was safe. I was free. When I glanced out into the parking lot, I saw a few cars pulling in, disgruntled, groggy employees clutching coffees, heading towards me. As soon as the first one came in, I flew out of the store, ran to my car and got out of there as fast as I could. I'd never felt such relief, such happiness. I felt like a new man. All of my problems, even my financial ones, seemed dwarfed by what I'd just endured. When I pulled onto the main road, I rolled down my windows and flicked on the radio. But it wasn't my usual classic rock station that blared through the speakers. Instead, I heard the upbeat tune of a saxophone. And as I listened to that horrible looping melody, I realised that my days as a night guard work for West Market may not be over just yet. So what I get from that is he could have left. He could have left after an hour and the results would have been the same because she kind of cheated, didn't she? She made him look at her eyes through the camera. So she won. Don't get me wrong, that is not a game that I want to play and those are not rules that I want to follow. But if that was me, I would have such a big problem with the fact that she's now following me. Well, I would probably have a problem with that anyway. But a huge problem with the fact that she's cheated. She climbed up like a spider and showed me her eyes through the camera. Fuming. Absolutely fuming. They'd probably haunted for the rest of my life. This next story I found on Reddit, and it's actually a couple of stories in one. So this woman, she's a nurse at a hospital, and she tells her original story, and then she says, I've got more. Where that come from? And a couple of people said, what else have you got? So she's told a few stories, and I'm just going to read them all to you. I work as a nurse at a hospital in the UK that was initially constructed during World War II, and was supposed to be a temporary facility. However, that was not the case, and it was further built upon and still remains a slightly modernised building. I recall doing a night shift during the wintertime and had a patient admitted to us with an infection, but otherwise had no illnesses that could affect their cognitive function, i.e. dementia or learning difficulties, etc. At around 2 to 3 a.m, said patient began to scream from the side of the room they were placed in. Myself and another nurse responded. Once in the room, I tried to defuse the situation and calm the patient down. All the while, the patient was screaming about how a man with a bag over his head had been stood at the end of her bed, watching her. And as we entered the room, I could tell something was off. I felt a shift in energy despite myself telling the patient that there was nothing to be concerned about. Once settled, myself and the other nurse that came with me had turned to leave the room and witnessed what I can only describe as a shadowy figure pass through a set of double doors outside of the side room in which the patient resided. The doors are behind a bit of an alcove, so you can't see them from the side room, but once you leave the room, you can see them. After a few seconds, both myself and the responding nurse clicked onto the fact that the double doors are always locked and have to be unlocked with keys. The time it took from us seeing the figure pass through that area and how long it would take to unlock said doors, pass through them, and then lock them again from the other side would be near on impossible. Therefore, we both came to the conclusion that it was a ghost or entity of some sort and returned to the desk somewhat unnerved. The hospital that I work at has its fair share of ghost stories, and this is one of 3 experiences I've had personally during my 5-year stay with this hospital in particular. And of course somebody said, what are the other experiences? Can you tell us? And the original poster said, of course. Another experience was when I did a shift on the old private part of the hospital, which was bought out by the NHS back in 2020. The layout of the ward is best explained in the way that it's a T-shape and there aren't any bays, only side rooms. It must have been early hours of the morning and I was sat at a desk with a colleague of mine writing out some patient notes. And out of nowhere was the most blood-curdling scream, reminiscent of a banshee. 3 of the other girls on shift came hurtling down the corridor to the desk looking shook up. I was then asked to check the rooms. Perhaps being the only male colleague was that reason, but I checked every single room out of the 26 on there, and every patient was asleep, out cold, not a single person was awake. Another experience I had, I was working a shift on the opposite end of the ward where I was based. A patient had passed away in a side room. Once last offices had been conducted and the patient had been sent to the morgue, we had the room cleaned and another patient admitted into there. Within an hour or so, the patient called the bell to alert a nurse that they wanted them and explained how they felt uneasy in the room and how they felt like there was something/someone under the bed. We moved the patient into another room and didn't really think much of it. They were fine after this. And then we had another patient admitted. We gave the room another clean, and got the new patient comfortable in there, and only 10 minutes later, we were called back by the patient saying there's someone under my bed. I looked. I personally looked. There was no one under the bed. There's also another story from where I work, but this one isn't mine. One of the doctors who were called to an arrest passed a girl on the corridor who asked where the nearest exit is, and he pointed in the direction of the exit whilst rushing to where he was called to. Once at the scene of the cardiac arrest, the doctor realised that the woman he saw in the corridor, the one he pointed to the nearest exit, was also the woman laying on the bed in front of him. She ended up dying on that hospital bed, and the doctor told us this story. We rushed to see that security footage. We believed him. We all knew what went on at this hospital, but we had never had something like this before. The security footage showed him directing a person that wasn't even there. He left after watching that footage. He didn't even finish his shift. He never stepped foot back in that hospital. I've saved this next one for last because it was written into me, and I think it's really, really exciting when I've got a story that nobody else has. Because a lot of these stories, you know, they're found off Reddit or Creepypasta or anywhere that's online that there's a scary story. If it's good enough, I'll read it, I'll tell it to you guys, but it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily the first person telling it because it's out there on the internet. So when I get a story sent in to me, nobody else has had that. It's like an exclusive if I was a journalist. So it's really exciting for me. So I've left it to last. I normally rewrite them. The person who sent it in has asked me not to rewrite, so I will absolutely honour that. I've had a quick skim because I want to be as surprised as you guys are. So as I'm not rewriting anything, I'm not thoroughly reading it. So we're gonna read it together. I used to think night shifts were peaceful. That's what I told everyone anyway. That I liked the quiet, the stillness, the feeling that the world had paused and I could exist without being watched. Which is funny because now I don't think I've ever felt more watched in my whole life. I worked the night shift at a private medical office, midnight to 6, no staff, no patients, just me. The building sits just off a main road, but at night it might as well be in the middle of nowhere. The street lights outside flicker, the waiting room lights buzz overhead, and the security system beeps every time I move between zones. You get used to it. You get used to the silence. And that's the dangerous part. Because when something changes, you notice. I used to think night shifts were peaceful. That's what I told everyone anyway. That I liked the quiet, the stillness, the feeling that the world had paused and I could exist without being watched. Which is funny, because now I don't think I've ever felt more watched in my whole life. I worked the night shift at a private medical office, midnight to 6, no staff, no patients, just me. The building sits just off a main road, but at night it might as well be in the middle of nowhere. The street lights outside flicker, the waiting room lights buzz overhead, and the security system beeps every time I move between zones. You get used to it. You get used to the silence. And that's the dangerous part, because when something changes, you notice. The first note wasn't scary, it was odd. Folded neatly, tucked just inside my desk drawer. I assumed one of the day staff had left it behind. It said, "You always arrive 2 minutes early." I like that. I remember smiling just slightly. It felt observant but not threatening, like someone had noticed something small about me, something personal. The second note came the next night. This time it was on the desk, placed right in the centre like it had been waiting for me. Midnight softens you. You move slower, softer. That made me uncomfortable, but I still rationalised it. Someone with access, someone joking, someone bored. By the third night, I checked the building before I even sat down. Every room, every hallway, every locked door. Nothing. It was all empty. Exactly how it should be. That's when I found the first gift. A small box wrapped carefully, placed on my chair. I didn't open it straight away. I just stood there, key still in my hand, staring at it like it might react. Eventually, I sat down and unwrapped it. And inside was a bracelet. Silver, thin and minimal. Exactly the kind I'd been looking at online, at home, late at night. There was a note beneath it. You have good taste. I prefer this one too. And that's when something shifted, because it wasn't just observation anymore. It was access. After that, the notes came every night, longer, more detailed, less like messages and more like documentation. You hum when you're alone, not songs, just patterns. You check the time at 3:17 every night. You don't realize you do it. You rub your wrist when you're anxious, left side, always. I stopped bringing my laptop, stopped scrolling on my phone, stopped doing anything that felt private, because it didn't feel private anymore. And then I told my husband, not everything, just that something strange was happening at work, that I felt like someone had access to the building. He was calm, too calm, maybe. He said it was probably a co-worker, that I was overtired, that night shifts can make you paranoid. You're alone for 6 hours, he'd say. Your brain fills in the gaps. And I so wanted to believe him, so I tried. I really tried to believe him. But then came the night I heard something. It was around 2:40 a.m, that dead time where everything feels suspended. Not late anymore, not early yet. I was at the desk when I heard it. A soft sound, not loud, but wrong. A door closing. I froze, because I hadn't moved in over an hour. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I grabbed the keys and started walking, very slowly, trying not to make noise, trying to hear something else. The hallway lights flickered as I moved. That's normal, they always do that. But that night, it felt like something was moving with me, between the lights, just out of sync. Exam room 2 was slightly open. I know I'd closed it. I always close everything. I pushed the door open. It was empty. But on the examination table, there was a note. You're starting to feel it now. I didn't finish my shift. I left. Keys, bag, everything. I just walked out. And the next day I didn't go back. I told my husband I was quitting, and this time I told him more. I told him about the notes, the gifts, the feeling of being watched. He listened. He nodded, and he didn't interrupt. And then he said, maybe someone's just fixated on you. The way he said it made my stomach turn. Not concerned, not protective, just observational. I stayed home after that for a few days, and everything felt normal again, quiet and safe. Until I found the first note in the house. It was in my coat pocket, a coat I hadn't worn since my last shift. You shouldn't have left so suddenly. I checked every room, every window, every lock, nothing. And that's when I started noticing other things. Small things, things that didn't quite fit. The angle of the bedroom mirror had changed, slightly, just enough to reflect more of the bed. The hallway light outside our bedroom would sometimes already be on when I woke up, even though I always turned it off. Once I found my laptop open, screen dark but just not shut. I always shut it. I asked my husband. He shrugged and said maybe I'd forgotten. You have been stressed, he said. And I almost started to feel disorientated, like I couldn't trust my own memory. Until the night I found the camera. It was small, hidden inside the smoke detector in the hallway. So small I almost missed it. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I didn't panic. Not immediately. I just stood there staring at it, feeling something settle in my chest. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The notes, the details, the timing. Someone hadn't just been watching me at work. They'd been watching me here too, at home, at my home. I didn't call the police. I didn't scream. I waited. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, and when my husband came in, I asked him a simple question. Do you feel like someone's watching us? He paused, just slightly. And then he smiled. Sometimes, he said. I watched him carefully, just waiting. Why? He asked. I told him about the camera. I expected shock, confusion, anger, but he just looked at me. Quiet, thinking. And then he said, well, that's unsettling. And nothing more. No questions, no urgency, just that. The next day, the camera was gone. I didn't mention it, and neither did he. But that night, there was a note on my bedside table. You're very observant when you want to be. I didn't sleep. After that, I started looking, really looking. And once you start, you can't stop. There were more, not obvious, not easy to find. One behind the vent in the bathroom, one inside the living room lamp, one, I wish I hadn't found this one, inside my wardrobe, always angled the same way, always watching me. I never confronted him directly, not properly. One night I asked him, do you ever feel like you know things you shouldn't? He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, I think people ignore things they shouldn't. It didn't sound like an answer. It sounded like a warning. I started to understand something then, something I didn't want to understand, that he wasn't going to admit anything, ever, because he didn't need to. Knowing was enough. And pushing it further felt dangerous. So now, I don't work. He said it would be better if I stayed home for a while until things settle, and I agreed. Because here's the truth. If I stay, I know where he is, I know what he's doing, and I know when he's watching. If I leave, I don't. And that feels so much worse. Sometimes I still find notes, not often, but just enough to remind me. Last night there was one on my pillow. I hadn't seen him put it there. I hadn't hurt him. You feel safer when you understand the rules. And I think that's the worst part. Not the camera, not the notes, not even the watching. It's that I do understand the rules. And I'm still here, which means he's still playing. It was her husband the whole time. Why? Because he didn't want her to work? Because he wanted to know her every move? Because he wanted full control? He had it. He's got it. And she just has to play along. Don't you think a story is so much more terrifying when the evil comes from someone that you're supposed to love and trust? Or even more scary, they're supposed to love you back. I just think that's so much more scary. And if you guys have any more stories like that, any more stories that where the evil comes from within, where it starts from inside your home, or where it starts from the person that you trust the most, the person who knows everything about you and then uses it all against you. Do you see where I'm going? If you guys have any stories like that, send them in. Just send them in. And on that note, thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode of Spill the TXC. I hope you've enjoyed the stories as much as I have. I hope they have thoroughly petrified you, and there will be plenty more of that in next week's episode. I love you. Bye.